I'm David Flint, and this is Conversations with Conservatives, broadcast by Safe Worlds TV from the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. And my guest today is Jack Hammond QC, a very distinguished member of the Melbourne Bar. Mr. Hammond, Jack, became very prominent in the national press recently because of his opposition to the very sudden and unexpected proposed changes in the budget in relation to superannuation, particularly the retirement phase of superannuation, which came as a great shock to many Australians, not only people in that retirement phase, but most aspirational Australians who see their task in life as keeping off the budget, keeping off the backs of the other taxpayers, and independently retiring. So, Jack, why did you take a position in relation to the changes suddenly announced in the budget?
Well, just after 7:30 p.m. on Thursday the 3rd of May, I happened to have sat down on the couch with my wife, Greta, to watch Morrison, the Treasurer, let Australia know what was in the budget. And by and large, at the beginning, I didn't take much notice. But now what I discovered is page 7 of his budget speech. He said something which made me sit up and take notice. And he said this, I heard him say this, and may I be permitted to quote it in the interest of accuracy. From 1 July 2017, we will be reducing access to generous superannuation tax concessions for the most wealthy by introducing a transfer balance cap of $1.6 million on amounts moving into the tax-free retirement phase, with balances able to increase above this cap on account of tax-free earnings once transferred. The transfer balance cap will be applied to both current retirees and to individuals yet to enter their retirement phase. Well, at that I just sat bolt upright. I said, what? I turned to my wife and said, did you hear that? And she said, what did I hear? Because she'd fallen asleep by that point. And we've had here in Melbourne some home attacks by a criminal gang known as the Apex gang. And I'm sure she thought we were having one of those home attacks. I did my best to relay to her what Scott Morrison had said. And I said, that's appalling. That's absolutely appalling. She said sleepily, yes, whatever you say, dear, and decided to doze off again. That night, later we went to bed. She slept the sleep of the innocent and unconcerned, and I tossed and turned all night because I seriously was very worried about what I heard.
Well, you might be interested to know, in a piece in Spectator, I described this as being like a thief in the night, taking people's savings.
Well, the Apex gang are just that. They're thieves in the night. That's what they do. They break into people's homes and terrorise them and then get their car keys and steal their cars. So perhaps there was something subliminal between you and I going on.
But hadn't the Treasurer very recently said that he wouldn't be doing this?
Well, we have a website. May I be permitted to?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. The website is saveoursuper, all one word, .org, .org.au.
Ah, that's the, yes, saveoursuper.org.au.
Yes. Now, on that, we have put 12 promises made by Scott Morrison in May and June last year. and one can summarise them by this statement. He said, the government has made it crystal clear that we have no interest in increasing taxes on superannuation either now or in the future.
No interest in increasing taxes on superannuation now or in the
future.
Very clear statement. It couldn't be clearer, could it?
Well, one would have thought not. He went on to say, unlike Labor, we're not coming after people's superannuation. Now, if your viewers go to our website, they will see 11 other statements made by Scott Morrison, and none of which featured in his budget speech, I regret to say. There may have been a very good reason for not putting that in his budget speech, one would think, but all of a sudden, that no longer formed part of his narrative.
Jack, just on that 1.6 million, I looked at what you could get if you put that into a Westpac account, and it was about 35,000 a year for two people, and quite often the spouse depends on the other spouse's superannuation. 35,000 a year is not a lot of money, is it?
Well, it certainly isn't if you'd saved up that sort of money, but I think we fall into the trap which has been set both for the press and I think for the vast majority of Australians, set by the government by turning the focus on what they call the most wealthy. And one then is driven to start looking at the figures. But whereas it's true, when I first heard the announcement, David, my self-interest kicked in, and it was that really that first provoked my reaction. My self-interest. What is this man doing to me? But very quickly, that turned to dismay and to anger, because it is a fundamental breach of trust has occurred. A fundamental breach of trust has occurred, and the sort of statements that I mentioned that Scott Morrison had made form the basis for that assertion.
And can you save that point, because we're now going to go to a break, Jack, and we'll come back in a moment, and if you can continue that very valid point. I'm David Flint, and this is Conversations with Conservatives, and today I'm in conversation with Jack Hammond, QC. I'm David Flint, and this is Conversations with Conservatives. And I'm in conversation today with Jack Hammond, QC. Jack, you had just been saying that the measures proposed in the budget were an extraordinary breach of trust.
Correct. And you may also recollect that prior to the election commencing, the Prime Minister had suggested that the key issue would be the answer to the question, whom do you trust? In fact, I think it was who do you trust, but I think it's correct to say whom do you trust? Nevertheless, that question has disappeared. It hasn't featured anywhere in this election, and I suspect it's because people would not give the answer that the Prime Minister would have hoped. The issue about trust that struck me is this, David. You can't buy trust, you can't sell trust, you can only earn trust. And once earned, it's very easily lost if you breach it, and increasingly difficult to regain. And when one focuses on that as being the issue that underlies the superannuation proposals of the government, that is, how can you trust people who have said what I mentioned previously by Scott Morrison, when they clearly do not give effect to what they've said? And when one focuses on the trust issue, David, one realises that you are directed away from the spin of what was in the budget speech, and I regret to say, in budget paper number 2, which is the Treasury document, which refers to the most wealthy. You then turn your focus to the trust issue, and that affects millions of other Australians, not the so-called 1%, 2%, or up to 4%. It is effectively the other 96%. And in particular, and in one sense it's a bit like Menzies' forgotten people, it's those who are compelled, they're effectively compelled by the compulsory superannuation scheme to put their hard-earned savings into superannuation. They've virtually got no say in that. And as a consequence, they trust, as they must, the government of the day not to reduce those savings by government action, by taxes of which they were not aware when their hard-earned money was being put in. And on any view, that is what the government is proposing in respect of the retirement amounts.
Jack, I remember reading that speech of the Treasurer when he was addressing a superannuation organisation, I think in January of this year, in which he warned that Labor's proposal would undermine confidence in the system. And I think you're making a very important point. What he's done is what the Turnbull government has done seems to have been to take away confidence in the superannuation system.
Unquestionably, because if you can't trust the government in respect of superannuation, then how can you have confidence in the superannuation system?
In a piece I wrote for Spectator, I criticised the government in joining Labor in the politics of envy, in looking at allegedly wealthy people and using them as the basis for this undermining of public trust.
Well, David, you were, if I may say so, spot on the politics of envy point, because that's with Malcolm Turnbull's jibe at Bill Shorten. But even so, once you embark upon determining, well, who benefits and who loses, one is guided away from the question of trust, because superannuation itself, put to one side whether or not it's the government who has decided to deprive people of a tax-free income which they promised, the very concept of superannuation, which lasts probably 40, maybe 50 years savings and payouts, relies on trust. You rely on the money being there. You don't see it go into the superannuation fund. You don't see the shares or whatever they may be increasing in value in real terms. You trust that when the time comes that you need to cash in, as it were, there will be money there. And if it wasn't there, where would you go? You'd head off to the police and you'd say, my money's been stolen. Now, I can't put it as highly as that now, so far as the government is concerned, but on any view, the tax-free superannuation account, which was supposed to be tax-free, is limited. You have to take out an amount which you didn't have to do previously and either spend it on your children and grandchildren, or they say to you, you can put it into your accumulation concessionally taxed account. Now, what do those words mean? They mean your money moves from a tax-free on the earnings and tax-free into your hands basis to a 15% tax on earnings in the accumulation account. So what's the present's been handed to the Australian people? From no tax, which were Morrison's promise, to at least 15% tax on the earnings.
The way they dealt with this seems to me to be extraordinary. The content is wrong, but if you're going to look at an important institution like superannuation, you surely do it through a proper investigation, a white paper, something like that, so that there's proper discussion. And I think there's a productivity commission inquiry going on anyway into the area. It seems to me that the process is very bad to suddenly announce this and then rush off to an election.
Well, I agree. But you are right about the Productivity Commission. It came down with a report in 2015. And for those that are interested, if they go to our website, we have quoted extracts both from that report and also an earlier Reserve Bank report, which talks about grandfathering superannuation changes. And you will see the quotations from the Productivity Commission and the Reserve Bank. You simply click on those, and the source documents, in the case of the Reserve Bank, some writers who are writing about what the Reserve Bank has said, and in the case of the Productivity Commission, a copy of relevant parts of the report are there.
That's in saveoursuper.com.au.
No, not .com, David. .org, O-R-G, .au. It's a simple error to make. I'm not critical of you. So
No,
it's
thank
super.
you.
It's right. It's Save Our Super, all one word.
Yes.
.org, O-R-G, .au.
Good.
Now, when one moves away from the issue of who's being targeted, and one rather looks at whose trust has been breached, well, if the people of Australia knew about it, particularly the vast majority that really have no say in whether they have superannuation and by what means it is saved.
Yes, well, on that point, unfortunately the clock has caught up with us. We'll go to a break and we'll come back to exactly that point. This is Conversations with Conservatives. I'm David Flint and I'm speaking with Jack Hammond QC. David Flint, and this is Conversations with Conservatives. And I'm having a conversation with Jack Hammond QC about the proposed changes in superannuation. Jack, you were pointing to the whole question of trust, of all those many people who've been brought compulsorily into the superannuation system, and what trust they must now have in that system.
Well, not so much, if I may say so, the system. They've got to have trust in the government,
yes, exactly.
who really permits the system to operate, and should allow it to operate on the rules and assumptions under which the people have been contributing, say, their hard-earned earnings to the superannuation fund, in which they often find themselves because they have little understanding and little appreciation of what the employer has decided on their behalf. They must trust that the government of the day will not reduce their retirement savings in circumstances when they are relying on that income to help them live a comfortable life when they retire. But when a government changes the rules and does not grandfather, that is, exempt from the new rules, those that have acted upon the old rules in good faith, in circumstances where they've done everything that the government wanted them to do, encouraged by the government. When a government then changes the rules, or colloquially moves the goalposts during the game, without exempting from the new rules those that have acted on the old rules in good faith, then you lose trust in the system.
I think that's a very important point. I know a number of people who are in their middle age, I suppose, or younger, who have children, who are thinking that as they get older, they'll start putting more money into their superannuation funds in their 50s and so on, so that they'll build up the fund towards the end of their working life rather than earlier. So the grandfathering should extend to a considerable period, shouldn't it?
Oh yes. I mean, if you, it's like a child. If you say to a child, well, look, you can do this, and if you do that, you'll get a couple of lollies, and they do it, and then they say, well, where's my lollies? You say, well, here they are, but I'm taking them back. A child would feel obviously a genuine sense of grievance, and they would scream, as many people are doing now. And you don't get tied up, the child doesn't say, but that's a retrospective change or a retroactive change. They simply say, that is unfair. That's wrong. That's what you promised. And so should people, and people are saying that about their superannuation retirement benefits, which are now going to be less than they were encouraged to believe they would be.
I found that speaking to people, they seem very annoyed and irritated when ministers start debating retrospectivity.
Well, that's because, if I may say so, and without wishing to bore your viewers, retrospectivity, retroactivity are legal terms, and their application depends on the particular circumstances of the particular facts. And it's easy enough to start off by saying, oh, that's retroactive or that's retrospective, without analysing each particular set of facts. And consequently, it is open to people to say, yes, it is retrospective, and others to say, no, it isn't retrospective. And I found, and well, for what it's worth, I take the view that a number of the proposals are retrospective in their effect. But I found that using that term is a barren exercise, because it's like a schoolyard dispute. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. But what is unquestionably valid is the concept of grandfathering. It has a long and honourable history in the area of superannuation legislation. In fact, our website is the place to find the history. We have a former Treasury official who has been of great assistance to us, and he's done a lot of research, and the results of that research are to be found on our website with particular reference to grandfathering.
Is there a reference there to the 2004 grandfathering of the politicians, what I would call platinum superannuation scheme?
Not expressly, David, but that issue is frequently raised with me. But I see that it is a good political point to make, and the political point simply is, well, if you've done that for yourselves, why aren't you doing it for us? And you leave the politicians perhaps squirming uncomfortably. But I don't really have a problem with what they did in this sense. They were doing no more than what I believe is fair and reasonable.
Their reasonable expectation, wasn't it? That,
exactly. They went into Parliament on that basis.
But you have a reasonable expectation that your superannuation won't be interfered with.
Exactly. So if one wishes to look at the politicians, the manner in which the politicians dealt with their own superannuation, I would just ask to look beyond the politics of envy, as we've heard so much about, to behind it and say, well, would it, if I were in that position, would it have been fair to me in the circumstances? Now, I think that properly analysed, it was fair not to make the persons that had been under the old rules then be subject to the new rules, given their reasonable expectations.
Well,
I was saying it. Sorry, David.
Yes. One of the things that surprised me, and we may be about to reach the point where we have to go to a break. One of the things that surprised me was the reaction of the media. They dismissed this. They treated it as though it was not an unreasonable thing to do. It only affected the wealthy. Whereas with a thing like, for example, the knighthood of Prince Philip, that seemed to be the end of the world. And they misrepresented aspects of it, and they suggested that this should bring down the Abbott government. The reaction just seemed to be out of all proportion there. But again, the reaction on this was to treat it as not terribly important and probably pretty fair, and it's only taking from the wealthy.
Well, in my view, there was more spin in the budget speech, and I regret to say, in budget paper number 2 in this area, than you'd expect from Shane Warne.
Well, that's very good, and on that point, I think it's a wonderful point to go to a break. This is Conversations with Conservatives. I'm David Flint, and I'm in discussion with Jack Hammond QC, and we're talking about superannuation. David Flint in Conversations with Conservatives, and I'm talking to Jack Hammond QC about superannuation. And Jack, you just mentioned the question of spin in the Treasury document, but I'm wondering why you, a QC, leading member of the Melbourne Bar, have decided to take up this cause?
Well, as I think I mentioned a little earlier, when I heard the Treasurer make that announcement, it's true that I viewed what was being said through the prism of my own self-interest. I might add that self-interest, as Jack Landseg, the former Premier of New South Wales, well-known tough-talking Labor man, and I paraphrase him, he said, in the horse race of life, always back self-interest. It's always trying. And true it was that I viewed it in that light. But shortly thereafter, it resolved itself down to one of breach of trust. And the breach of trust doesn't focus upon the money, doesn't focus upon the wealthy. It focuses upon something which all Australians deal with, I suggest, every day of their lives. Trust in other people, trust in their family, trust in, as I said earlier, that your money will be paid back from the bank. Trust plays a very important part in our lives. And with trust, you can't buy it, you can't sell it, you can only earn it. And trust once earned is very easily lost.
Does this trust go beyond the politicians concerned to the very institution of representative democracy?
Well, when one looks at some of the ways in which certain politicians have behaved, one would have to have serious doubts about their knowledge of parliamentary democracy and the obligations that it places on people, particularly ministers of the Crown.
Have you ever become interested, as I have, in what happens in Switzerland and some other countries where there's an ingredient of direct democracy, where the politicians are actually made more accountable?
Well, I'm aware of the power to recall. Some of those, as you'll be aware, David, occur in the US as well, when you can recall the parliamentarians. I'm not so sure that having that sort of Damocles hanging over their head is necessarily would facilitate long-term planning.
But you have that, Jack, you have that over your head. Solicitors will only brief you if you're a superb barrister, won't they?
Well, that's true.
You're accountable
and you
all the
live
time.
and die by your reputation.
Yes.
But
and you're accountable. You're accountable to the court in relation to how you conduct yourself.
Correct. You're accountable every day you stand up in court. And even when you're not in court, you're still accountable to the court. But I think political life itself is hard enough without making it even more insecure by the risk of an instant recall. I think the problem there is that we're more likely to get people who think for even shorter terms than they presently do, if they've always got to have their eye on the vote that might suddenly come up next week. But the concern that I have with the breach of trust, if I may just take you back to that, David, is the effect on the whole superannuation system. It unquestionably affects millions of people that I mentioned earlier who have no say in where their earnings are invested in superannuation. And those many millions of Australians probably don't have enough time, the interest, the contacts, the skills, and the resources of people like me, when you ask about QCs, people like me, to do anything about a government that doesn't do the right thing, that acts unfairly and not in accordance with proper process.
The Prime Minister...
Those other millions can't do anything about it, but
yes.
People like me and the people that are with me can, and we will.
The Prime Minister recently excused his breach of trust by saying that, this money can, the 1.6 million can be invested in a balanced fund and you'd probably be getting about 5%, and that's a reasonable amount. Is that an excuse?
Well, look, I'm going to talk a bit like a politician. I'm going to move sideways on your question. By even considering that deserving of discussion is to buy into the very narrative that they wish to direct yours and mine and the media's attention. They want to direct it away from what, in my view, is the most fundamental issue.
Which is the breach of trust. Just on that, Jack, is there certain naivety in this, in that you'd bring down a budget with such a breach of trust, going to the heartland, the aspirational voters, the heartland of the Liberal Party, the forgotten people, as Menzies called them. You do that, and then you'd go straight to the Governor-General and ask for a double dissolution. Does that suggest some naivete in doing that?
Quite the contrary. It demonstrates cynicism of the highest order.
Really?
Because I've slowly come to the view during this election campaign and the manner in which the Prime Minister and others have responded to the concerns of people in relation to the proposed superannuation changes, I've come to the view that this was anticipated, planned for, and in fact, some people have said to me that it is part of the strategy that was adopted by, a similar strategy, I should say, adopted by Cameron in the UK. That is to focus on the wealthy, tax the wealthy, stick to your plan of look at our new economic plan, treat every question as being to be answered in the context of our new economic plan. Whatever the question, what did you have for breakfast? Well, 3 sausages, but that's got something to do with our new economic plan. Keep saying that, keep saying it, and keep emphasising it. Now, you've only got to look back and look at this strategy during this campaign, and that's how it's being run. I think it's fair to say something else too. And I've been told this by a person that is involved in polling the marginal seats. The superannuation issue in the marginal seats is not getting any traction. It's getting traction in the blue Liberal seats because it's affecting people that have both the knowledge about superannuation and the ability to do something about it. But the vast majority of people do not trouble themselves about it. It's a very complex issue, as I've found out, coming to it even as a barrister.
Yes, and on that point, the time has caught up with us.
Yep.
I think your essential theme is this is a breach of trust, which should not be tolerated. And your website is saveoursuper.org.au. And Jack Hammond, thank you very much for your words of wisdom. And I think that voters ought to be looking at your website, saveoursuper.org.au. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, David, for the opportunity.
And that concludes this fascinating interview with Jack Hammond QC, who's obviously an authority, or become an authority in this area, but more importantly, he's made the very important point that this is a question of trust. And this affects us all, because we're all involved in superannuation. And if we can't trust the government in relation to the running of superannuation, not to descend like thieves in the night onto our savings, we are in a very difficult position indeed, and the country is in a difficult position, and the government is asking for your confidence in, and they have obviously breached your confidence in terms of the trust which you would give them.